So today we continue our series on Genesis, and we're in Genesis chapter 13. I mean, if you ask ourselves, and if you attended, and I'm sure we've attended other churches, other service, what makes a good worship service? What makes a great worship? Sometimes it's the singing, great singing. I remember, especially in CCF, when they have young kids who will lead, the Elevate would lead the worships every so often right there. And they'll be very energetic, and some people would really enjoy that. Some people would enjoy more solemn songs. And that's just how it is. Other people, it's a comfortable chair. A well-temperatured room. But, again, I remember me and my son going to a church. In fact, a church that had no walls. It just literally had a roof. Yet the people there were so real, so loving. Some worship service are great because of the sharing. I noted that in CCF, they always have this sharing, and that's great. It encourages us. We see how the Word of God has affected them, how the relationship with God has been transforming them and changing them, and that's what it's supposed to do. In some cases, worship is great. Our worship is great because the message is good. The speaker is very talented, and the way they handled the message, the passage is very well, very encouraging. But as I was looking at Genesis chapter 13, our passage today, it made me think and made me realize that it's not there where genuine worship is seen. That worship is the peripherals of worship. It starts there, it ends there, but it's not the climax of worship. The climax of worship is not the singing. In some cases, it's not the dancing. Some church, they do dancing. It's not the singing, it's not the dancing, it's not the testimony. In fact, maybe it's not the message is the main climax of worship. The main climax of any worship service is a transformed life. If your worship service does not transform your life, then it's not a great service. It's just a show. It's just a seminar. It's not really great. As I said, it is the peripherals of things. But what makes worship great is that when you leave this place, you're transformed, and your life between this Sunday and next Sunday is climaxed in the middle by your obedience to God. That is worship. It's not the 1 hour, an hour and a half here, and an hour and a half next week. It's how that hour and a half has transformed you to a life of obedience, where worship is now expressed in your life. Because worship is all about focusing on God. When you sit here and listen, your focus should be on God, in hearing Him and responding to Him. And if you're not focused on God during worship, then it's not worship. Because worship is focusing our eyes and our hearts on Him. And as we focus our eyes and our hearts on Him, and He speaks to you, you will respond. That is worship. not being entertained. It's coming to God, being at awe with God. So worship really, in our passage, is a life of sacrifice. Go to Genesis chapter 13. We're looking at the whole chapter today. And it starts in verse 1 that says, so Abram went up from Egypt to Negev. Remember, in chapter 12, he went to Egypt, right? Because of the famine. He entered the promised land, and the promised land was not so promising. And I entitled the message, The Realities of the Promised Land. He and his wife and all that belongs to them, and Lot with them. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, silvers and golds. He went on a journey from Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where this tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. We see here again, as we start the passage, Abram what? Wealthy. You know, why was he wealthy? Because he went to Egypt, told the wife to lie, deceived the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, instead of killing him, offered him a lot of wealth, livestock. That's why he comes back to the promised land, what? Wealthy. So you remember the story? How he was very wealthy already, entering the promised land. Now, I don't know. Has any one of you bought a lotto ticket? Ako, I really don't buy tickets. But I remember the first time I bought a lotto ticket. Did I share this in America? I was with my wife. Did I share this? I went to America with my wife on one of the trips. And there's a mega lotto. Several states. It's huge money, right? And I bought tickets. And the money was so huge. $500 million. The night before the lotto, I couldn't sleep. I was problematic. So, man, what if I win? And I really couldn't. I was so excited. And the aunts and uncle, the uncle of Roy was kind of laughing at this. So, what shall I do with that money? I don't know what to do. And the night before, and kasi di ba the lotto ticket, it's like, you can hit it naman not in order, right? You can just hit the numbers, whatever it is. If you have that 5 or 6 numbers, you win. And the lotto was there. I saw the draw. First number, out. But I bought several tickets, out lahat eh. So that's fine. But I heard people who wins lotto, right? Normally, within the next 2 to 3 years, they lose everything. Their lifestyle changed. There's a study on that. Their lifestyle really changed. They now buy a fancy car. Now all their friends are around. He treats everybody. And in some cases, they ended up poorer. Poor na nga, naging poorer pa. And now, wow, he feels miserable about what happened. He had all the money, now it's gone. Now here in the case of Abraham, it's kind of similar. He won the lotto. He got a lot of wealth from Pharaoh, right? From his stay in Egypt. But what happened there was he got caught by Pharaoh lying. And he was rebuked by God. He was put to shame by God in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "Why did you do this? I thought you were a man of God. Why did you lie? Why did you tell the truth? If I only knew, I would have gotten your wife." And there, Pharaoh told him, "Leave this place." He got rebuked. But the good thing there is, unlike a lotto winner, Abraham's life did not really change. He had this new wealth, and yet we see in verse 4, what does he do? He worships God. He goes back to the promised land, The first thing he does is he worships God. I'm reminded of Proverbs 30 verse 9 that says, that I not be fool and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be want and steal and profane the name of the Lord. He now enters the promised land wealthy, yet he did not forget. The prophet said, Lord, don't make me too rich. I might forget you na. Who are you? I don't need you. I'm rich. Or Lord, don't make me too poor, Lord. Why? Because I'll profane you. I'll curse. I'll shout at you. But here we see Abraham going back to the promised land and worshiping God. You will note in Genesis chapter 12, Abraham did not worship God there. He was in Egypt. Nowhere in Genesis, in his time in Egypt, that he worshiped God. It is only when he went back to the promised land, when he went back to the place where God wanted him to be, in the middle of the will of God, that he was able to worship again. And I realized something. It's so hard for us to worship God if we're not in the middle of the will of God. Are you right now, as we attend this service, do you think you're in the middle of the will of God? Or are you here today out of obligation, out of habit? Or are you here today out of an outflow of a life of obedience to Him? Abraham was no hypocrite. He knew he was not in the promised land. He knew he was out of the will of God. That's why in Genesis chapter 12 in Egypt, he could not, and we do not see him worshiping God. Sad, no? A lot of people nowadays live double lives. They live out of the will of God and they still worship God. What kind of worship is that? Honestly, you might fool people around you, but you cannot fool Him who sees your heart. Go to Matthew, please. Matthew chapter 15. Matthew 15, verse 8 and 9. It says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." They were just worshiping in lips, but their heart is far away from me. How can you worship God when all through the week you are rebelling against Him? Who are you kidding, really? Stop fooling ourselves. When we run away from God, we do ourselves more harm. Do you know that? We harm ourselves when we sin. The farther we are from God, the more harm we bring into our life. And we have to realize this. Are we worshiping here today just in lips? Or are we worshiping here out of the outflow of our obedience and love for God? Because worshiping again is focusing on God. I mean, how can you say, I'm focusing on God today, but all through the week you choose to rebel against Him? How can we say that? Verse 5 in Genesis chapter 13. So we see in verse 4, Abraham worshiping God, where in the promise that he was back in the middle of the will of God, where God wants him to be, he was there, and there he worships God. In verse 5, we see this. Now Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions was so great that they were not able to remain together. I mean, due to the fact that both now Abram and Lot are wealthy, their flock and their herd was huge, was large, that the land could not supply, could not sustain them. And what was happening here is they were jockeying. They were jockeying for positions. Who can wake up early to get the grazing land? Because we had a big flock. Nag-aagawan, they were jockeying, nag-uunahan. As John Wayne said, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. Right? One must go. And I can imagine, right? The shepherds of Abram, come on, let's go na, let's wake up. Let's go to this place. Unahan na natin yung mga tao ni Lot. And you can see them jockeying for position. One will be crouching on the agreed boundaries, or I'll flock here, and you'll flock there, right? Then you can see the other one crouching in their space, and they will be fighting. And the problem here is this: the land, and it's in verse 7, is occupied by the Canaanites and the Perizzites. What does it mean? The prime land goes to the owner of the land. And what they're scrapping themselves are the non-prime land. Because I can imagine the mainland goes to the Canaanites. Alam nga naman saan lang yung mainland. In fact, they're giants, right? They're big, and they will not dare cross the path of the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So they're scrapping on tira-tira, the crumbs of the land. And I see this, and the problem of Lot and Abraham was brought about by what? Their wealth, their possessions. And I realized that wealth and possessions and blessings, material blessing, is not devoid of problems. Blessings has their own problems too. Lack of money, problem. Too many money, problem. Right? Lack of money, it's hard to pay mortgages. Too many money, hard to pay lawyers. Really, they charge an arm. My friend, they had a fight with money. His lawyer fee for 3 years was 250 million. Wow! So kung parang pakidnap po. I mean, fight of money is crazy. Too many, bad. Too little, sabi nga, money is an emotional matter. Especially when you part with it. People gets emotional once they need to part with money. I remember one of my richest friends, in fact, I was so surprised. He was telling me before, Bob, you know, every night I can't sleep. Ang dami kong problema. And I was shocked. I told my wife, could you believe that so-and-so told me that before he can't sleep at night. Why? Because he had a lot of problems. So, of all people, how can you have a lot of, ang dami-dami mong pera? Ako, I can relate. Wala akong pera eh. I can relate to the problem, but you, how? Because money does not solve problems. In some cases, it adds problem. I remember this guy who cheated the government of taxes. And one day, the preacher preached on Psalms that God hates liar, God hates cheats. After that Sunday, the man could not sleep at night. He was tossing and turning. His conscience was really bothering him. Then one day he said, enough is enough. I couldn't sleep for a month already. I'll pay my tax. He wrote a check to the BIR, and said, I can't sleep at night knowing that I have cheated you. Enclosed is 500,000 pesos. Signed, blah, blah. P.S. If I can't still sleep, I'll send the rest. Ayaw talaga magbayad. He was earning a lot, right? Money has its own problems. Right? The problem of Abraham and Lot is brought about by their wealth now. But I realized something. Anything that God gives you should draw you closer to God. Anything that God takes away from you should draw you closer to God. Anything that's happening in your life really should draw you closer to God. My son recently asked my permission. Dad, 2 days, 3 days ago, Dad, can I be the manager of the varsity girls team in faith? And I said, oh, who's the beautiful girl there? That man. Okay. Okay, before I answer that, I said, pray. Ask God. And I'll pray, I'll ask God. So, he prayed, I prayed. Then, was it yesterday, son? Yeah. Oh, Dad, he said, Dad, I prayed already, I think, during lunch. Okay, before you tell what God told you, I'll tell you what God told me. God said yes. Then he said, Dad, I can't believe it. God said yes. Oh, great. We talked to the same God. So my wife was like, oh, what? God said, yeah, God said yes to me. And God said yes. Then at night, last night, I was talking to myself, oh, you know what? I wonder why God said yes. Because you being a manager of the girls' varsity team should draw you closer to God. Anything happening in our life should draw us closer to Him. There's no accidents. Everything has its reason. And the reason is for you to draw closer to Him. You got money? Draw closer to Him. You got money was taken out, you draw closer to Him. Don't waste those opportunities to draw closer to God. Verse 7. So what happened when the resources was limited in the land? Right? Because they're scraping over tira-tira in the promised land. Verse 7 says, and there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in that land. Yun na nga, you know what I was saying. Someone owns the land. We get the prime land, right? I own the land. I get the prime land. And there was strife. Because now they're confined to a small space. A small parcel of land. The word strife there means quarrel. Which means what? There's two ways that this passage could mean the word quarrel. But in this case, it means verbal wrangling among parties. Comes from the Hebrew word rib. Honestly, it's really more of inisan. It was not a quarrel that is physical. It was more of sarcasm, is what that word means. It's not too big of a problem if I look at it. Given the word, there was just strife and quarreling. It's not a gang war, killing, no? It's just inisan. It's like a couple one time going to church. Husband and wife was in the car, had an argument, and the rest of the way, they were not speaking to each other going to church. Then passing a bar, and the husband trying to jab at the wife said, saw the pig, saw the cow, saw the mules. And the husband told the wife, must be your relatives. The wife said, yes, in-laws. It wasn't that tight. It was that quarreling. It was verbal tussles. Right? Like the husband one time always quarreling with the wife. One day the husband was surprised why the wife was not answering back. Huh? Have you been reading your Bible? Why are you not answering back anymore? What do you do? What did you answer back when you have a tassel? Oh, no, I just cleaned the toilet. What? How does clean the toilet release your stress? Well, like clean it with your toothbrush. She doesn't answer back. She gets even. And this fight that was happening between Lot's flock and Abraham's flock was a tussle. It's a verbal tussle. Right? Ang pangit niya, ang pangit mo rin. It's like that. It wasn't big. It was not the rib that means hostility, physical fights, murder. It's not. That's why nga I see the maturity of Abraham here. Go to verse 8. So Abraham said to Lot, seeing the tassels, seeing just the tassels, not between him and Lot, but between their herds and the herds of Lot. He said, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are brothers. You know, impressive. Abraham saw the problem. Minor. It's just a verbal tussle. Yet what he did is he had the discernment to see the situation. What this situation could lead into. And he wanted to nip it in the bud before it goes out of control. And here again, we see to me the climax of the worship of Abraham. He was now willing to give up his rights to Lot. Imagine, your herdsmen are fighting, quarreling, verbal, and you want to make sure that this does not progress and keep the unity within the family. What he did is, I'm willing to give up my rights. That's amazing. I mean, how many of us are willing to give up our rights? Matapakan lang tayo ng konti. Yung butot natin, nakaganon, my right is violated. Go to 1 Corinthians, please. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. First Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7. Actually, then, it is already a defeat for you that you have lawsuits with one another. That's a defeat already. Paul is talking to the church. People in the church were quarreling. They're filing cases. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? That's amazing. He was not thinking of their rights. He was thinking what is good. I had a call recently from a cousin of mine. I had a problem. I told him, partner, there's a simple thing now. Either there's the illegal way to fix it, there's a legal way, and there is what I called it, a negotiated way. A peaceful way. Sometimes it's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's about glorifying God. It's about shining the light of Christ in our life. Jump to chapter 9, verse 19. 1 Corinthians 9:19. It says, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I may win more. Paul was not thinking of his rights. He was thinking about how he could be of service to God more. How many of us are willing to give up our rights? And the solution that Abraham gives, di ba, his solution what? Choose the land. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I go left. The solution that Abraham gives puts his future and his welfare of him and his family into the hands of God. When Abraham was saying, Lot, you decide, he's basically saying, God, you decide. It's not worth the quarrel. I keep on telling people, the will of God does not involve sin. You cannot have a plan that involves sin and call it's the will of God. So Abraham here is now putting his future all in the hands of God. Some people might think that no, he's putting his future in the hand of Lot. What if Lot says he'll get this and I get this? He was not putting his future in the hands of Lot. He was putting his future in the hand of God. He does not want to quarrel over it. He was holding to this world very loosely, not tightly. And Abraham knew something that would alter his behavior. And that something is God. He knew God. He knows his God. He just worshiped him. He has a close relationship with him that alters his behavior. He knew God. And if I ask myself, if people could look into your life, what behavior would reflect a belief in God? Is there anything in your life right now, your behaviors, your actions, your attitude that reflects your belief in God? Proverbs 16 verse 9 says, "The mind of a man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." Lot might plan, Lot might choose, but at the end of the day, it's God's will that will prevail. And Abraham knew that. When Abraham did not choose to fight, he was not afraid. Because he knew that the mind of a man may plan his ways, but it's the Lord that directs his steps. In Proverbs 16 verse 33 it says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." Casting lots, dicing. The Bible says, you dice, but the number that will come out there is meant by God. Nothing is by chance. Nothing is random. And by doing this, Abraham is saying, God, some people, but they'll fight. They'll fight tooth and nail for their inheritance, for money, for whatever. As if God has not decided that already. You will just get 1 peso. A man plans, but it's the will of God that will prevail. Abraham knew that. He had an understanding of God that alters his behavior. Instead of whining, he just simply trusted him that whatever outcome is the outcome planned by God. Verse 9. That's why we see here, it says in verse 9 in Genesis chapter 13, "Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. And if to the right, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valleys of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot lifted up his eyes. Okay, you've given me a choice. I looked. And there he was attracted. He saw with his eyes how lush that area was. The area was. It's so funny. Remember what happened to Eve? She saw the fruit was good. Remember also in chapter 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of man to be beautiful. It's with the eyes, right? Here again, Lot saw, and there he decided to choose that land. And when he chose that land, he was in a sense removing himself to be part of the promised land. Some of us might think, I'm not like Lot. I will not decide based on what's nice, what's beautiful, what's lush. But if you ask yourself, when you make consideration in your life, do you make consideration based on physical or spiritual things? When you make decisions, is it based on a physical benefit or spiritual benefit? When we look for a job, are we looking for a job that would pay us well, or a job that would draw us closer to God? I remember a friend of mine, they're a couple during my younger years. And they don't have any kid. And we meet regularly. And I remember they call it cell group at that time. The cell that I would attend, it was kind of medyo low end eh. Medyo low end yung the group. And nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I enjoyed the company. And I remember meeting in JP Rizal, somewhere there. I would arrive in a car. All of them arrives public to the place. Our leader was a young couple. Then one day I heard that he said, I plan to buy a car, let's pray for it, blah, 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 blah. So great. Then one day he bought a car. To my surprise, he bought a Hiace. So, Hiace. So why do you need to buy a Hiace? You have no kids. And so it's so that I can pick up everybody so that we can go to the Bible study together. Galing mo naman. I mean, that, he was deciding stuff not based on their physical need, but based on their spiritual need of the group. Kasi wala nga ang transpo eh. Siya sumusundo. And I was so blessed by that. I mean, we ask ourselves, do we put job ahead of family? Do we choose our friends rightly? Do we choose friends that are fun to be with, or friends that would draw us closer to God? We might say that we're not Lot, but if we choose physical benefits more than spiritual benefits, then we are like Lot. When we decide things based on this, then we are like Lot. I mean, not to say things great about me or my family, but honestly, when I chose the school of Bambino, I know it was far. Man, I know it's really, really far. At Tipolo. Man, Bambino had an activity kind of there yesterday. It took him 5 hours going there. Kasi ito APEC eh. ASEAN. And just to keep his temper down. He doesn't naman have a temper, but he's cooled down. I kept him coming on the phone, right? Oh, traffic. But just to keep him company. But sometimes we have to decide really not necessarily what is for just physical benefit, but what is spiritually beneficial for my kids, my life, my wife. And not to say that I don't sometimes decide based on physical, right? We have to see the story to be real to us. Do we decide the same? And what's sad here is this. And as we will look, when Lot decided that, he based it on what he saw, right? Then you will see something here. How sin progress. How sin is a slippery slope. Remember what happened? He saw the land, right? He just saw the land. And he said that it's a good land. It's lush. But the word look there, by the way, or saw, was not just seeing. Because Abraham saw it too. The word saw there, according to Montgomery Boyce, is that he saw with a desire to live. It's not, Abraham saw the land. Lot saw the land. But when Lot saw the land, Lot saw the land. His seeing is like, man, I want that land. Is the seeing there. He was longing to be there. The sad part is what happens. If you go to verse 13, verse 12, what does, after seeing, what happens? He pitched his tent near Sodom. Right? Does it say that? He pitched his tent near. First, he just saw it. Now, he wants to what? Pitch his tent near Sodom. He knows Sodom is a bad place, a wicked place, but he sees the benefit. But he doesn't want to live in Sodom because it's really bad there, but he wants some of the benefits. So what I'll do is, I'll just pitch a tent near Sodom. Right? It's like liking a girl or liking a boy. You start with, she's beautiful, or he's handsome. Right? All of a sudden, what do you want to do? I want to be her friend or his friend. Anak, wag na. Not good for you. But Dad, we're just friends. Fine. What happened now to Lot? The third thing that happened to Lot is, we see go to Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter 14, verse 12. What do we see there? He is now what? Living in Sodom. Right? First, he just saw. Next, what happens? He is now living pitch a tent beside Sodom. In chapter 14, we see what? He is now living where? In Sodom na. Started with just seeing. A desire. Oh, I like that girl. Next is, I want to be her friend. Next is, oh Dad, she's my girlfriend. What? And Dad, okay lang yan. Di man kami papakasal eh. Di ba ganun naman normal yung mga kwento dyan? We're not man getting married. We're just girlfriends and boyfriends. Go to Genesis chapter 19. Verse 1. What happens? Lot now is seen at the gate. The gateway of Sodom. What does it mean? He's now the leader. He is now the political and business. Normally, the leaders and elders, they stay at the gate of a city. Can you see the slope? First, he just saw, I want to live there, but I'm not, not really there, but I like the benefits. I'll now pitch my tent beside it. Time passed by, where is he now? He's now living in Sodom, in that wicked place. Time comes by, guess what? Na-promote. Naging elder na ng place. It's a slippery. It starts with a glance. All of a sudden, you want to be his or her friends. All of a sudden, you want to be a girlfriend, boyfriend. All of a sudden, you're married. Oh. And it starts where? The look. Sabi ko nga, sin is a slippery slope. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good moral. Let's be real. What do you expect if you pitch your tent near Sodom? What do you expect if you start hanging out with wrong friends? What do you expect if you start playing bad video games? I never saw a kid that went berserk in school who's not addicted to violent video games. Wala pa narinig, ano yan eh, nagme-meditate ng Bible everyday. Ba't ka nagpapapatay? These people are addicted to that. No surprise, right? What do you expect if you start watching fashion shows a lot? Oh, then you want to buy expensive clothes. You want to buy new stuff always. As much as we refuse to believe it, bad company corrupts good character. It will have an impact on our life's choices. Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, he who walks with the wise will be wise, but the companion of a fool will suffer harm. Going back to Genesis chapter 13, verse 11 says, so Lot chose for himself all the valleys of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Here again, what happened? Lot chose what? To pitch his tent near Sodom. And where did he go? Eastward. Isn't it so funny when Adam and Eve was cast out of Eden, where did they go? East of Eden. When Cain was cast out, he was cast out where? East again. When they build Tower of Babel, they were traveling east. So here, the author was trying to say that he's doing the wrong choice. He's going east again, right? And we know it's a bad choice. Verse 12, Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and exceedingly sinners against the Lord. At that time, the reputation was bad already. They were wicked exceedingly. Exceptional sins. In fact, the word means one-of-a-kind sins. You want to see a sin that's so unusual, that's not done anywhere in the world? Go to Sodom. They have a one-of-a-kind sin there. What? Yeah, they do it there. Whatever. It's wicked. It's exceptional. It's in the annals of history, kumbaga. Go to 1 John chapter 2, please. 1 John chapter 2. It says, verse 15, sorry. Do not love the world, nor things of this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God will live forever. Beloved, in 1 Peter 2:11, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts, which wage war against the soul. I mean, let's not base our decisions on the flesh. Let's not fall in love too much to this world. What happens in verse 14 to 17? The Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the lands which you see, I give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land enough in length and breadth, for I will give it to you. We have to realize that Abraham had abandoned nothing that would not be more than compensated for. You cannot, as they said, you cannot outgive God. Abraham did not abandon anything that will not be more than compensated for, either in this life or in the life to come. One of our memory verse of my family is 1 Timothy 4:8, right? That says, but bodily discipline is profitable in a little things, but godliness is profitable in all things, not only in this life, but in the life to come. God is more than able to provide us. So when Abraham gave up his rights, God gave him more. Go to Luke chapter 6, please. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. It says, give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure. How good? It is pressed down. Normally, when they give rice to make daya, gusto nila mahangin. It's like ice cream, right? Cheap ice cream has a lot of air. Expensive ice cream is more dense. So you buy cheap ice cream, you take it from the freezer, let it melt, and if it's like the bad ones, baka maging kalahati na lang yung ice cream mo. It's full of air. A good ice cream, baka na magiging 3/4 na lang. Here it says, how good is the returns of God? It's pressed down. Not only is it pressed down, after pressing down, what do? They shake it so that the small grains would fall in the gaps. Para siksik na siksik. Pressed down, shaken together, and what? Running over. It's overflowing. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return. God will bless believers not only with equal proportion, but far more, super abundant, overflowing. Give, and it will be given back to you in good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. The attractiveness of the land is determined not by our senses, but what we see, what we hear, what we calculate. The attractiveness of the land is determined by the question, is it from the Lord? And if it's from the Lord, then the land is good. That is what makes it attractive, that God has given it to you. Therefore, its purpose will be sure. To Lot, the land was not good. The promised land, he chose a better place. Because he was basing it on his eyes, on his senses. Verse 18, last verse. Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt in the oak of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Genesis chapter 13 started with what? Abraham worshiping. Genesis chapter 13 ends with what? Abraham worshiping. But in the middle of it is what? A life of self-denial. A life of sacrifice. One cannot disjoin worship and a life of self-sacrifice. You cannot worship. You cannot say you worship today if in the middle of the week you've been rebelling all week long. The life of worship of Abraham is climaxed by what? A life of self-sacrifice. He was willing to give up his rights in order to keep peace in the family. And because of that, God rewards him. And there he goes on and ends the chapter with what? Him worshiping God again. Our life should be the same. Romans chapter 12, right? I urge you, brethren, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. That is what real worship is about. You are not worshiping if you are not living it out in your lives throughout the week. You cannot all of a sudden come here on Sunday and say, I'll worship God. It's not that way. If you really want to worship God, then live out the proddings of God that He has given you today. God, what do you want me to do? Ask that at this moment. God, what do you want me to do? You want to really worship today? Ask that question. God, what do you want me to do? What right do you want me to give up? What must I die to? Then do it. Do it today. Do it tomorrow. Do it every single day until we meet next Sunday again and genuinely worship God. That is a life of worship. Focusing on God today, asking God, God, what do you want me to do? Then living that commandment throughout the week. That's what we see in Abraham. He worshiped at chapter in verse 4. He lived it out in verse 5 to 17. And in verse 18, he worships again God. And in between that, he is blessed by God. Are you willing to worship Him? My desire is that the promptings of God to you today, this moment, will be responded by you. So that your week will be a worshipful week. Not only a 1 hour or 1.5 hour. It will be a 1 week experience of worshiping Him in spirit and in truth. Thus says the Lord. Amen. Our last song.